So you've moved to Texas. That's how we're starting it, right?
Yeah, right. Yes, I did.
He's part of this exodus. Yeah. California to Texas. I think he just kind of, Elon Musk saw what Jim was up to and said, damn, I got to get on that bandwagon.
My sphere of influence is broad.
This is the only way you think now, isn't it?
Doug, nice to see you.
Great to see you too. How are you? You silver-maned Adonis.
Hard-earned.
Figured I want to just make you feel as comfortable and pampered as possible as you arrive in our little speaking pod.
I love it.
Well, how is Texas? I mean, this was a huge life change. You have moved from the Bay Area to Dallas. And yep. I mean, that was an uprooting of monumental proportions. So, I mean, yep. What hatched that idea?
I was offered a job that even if it were in San Francisco, I would have definitely explored. But the fact that it was in Dallas was a huge bonus for me, because prior to that, last, I'd say 3-4 years, I'd been going to Dallas 2-3 times a month. All my main clients were in Dallas. So I grew to love this city. I never took to California, even though I'd lived there for 25 years. It never felt like home to me. I still refer to myself as a Bostonian when people ask me where I'm from. Like, I don't even identify with California in any way. I don't mention it, especially in Texas. Like, California has been erased from my identity. So it was an easy move to make. At least emotionally, it was an easy move to make. Logistically, on the other hand, it wasn't such an easy move to make.
Did you go straight to LA from Cambridge?
Yep. I just wanted something different in my life. And I remembered going through this math in my head and saying, what's the most opposite experience of Boston that I could possibly have at this stage in my life? And it was like, duh, LA. And I hated it. Absolutely hated it. Vowed that by my birthday, I'd move back to Boston that same year. But then work got a little more fun. I was working at House of Blues in their PR department. And, you know, as a young 20-something, being able to like go to the House of Blues anytime, see the shows, show off to my friends who came to visit me, get them in the House of Blues. I was like, look, I'm in the entertainment industry. I'm all that. Yeah. That was kind of fun, but that wore off soon. And then momentum, or inertia, probably that's a better word. It was just hard to move because you've got to worry about a job, right? Things like that. So I just stayed. And before I knew it, I had 2 kids, 2 cars, 2 dogs. And I was like, what am I doing in LA? I promised to leave by my birthday 20 years ago. And one day I just said, if I don't rip this Band-Aid off and move, I'm never going to move. But at that time, it was too hard to, pick everyone up and move back to Boston. So I, again, did the math. What's the closest thing to Boston that I can drive to from LA? And the answer was San Francisco. And that's how I ended up in San Francisco.
So the whole family moved up the coast when you took the job at Ketchum.
No. We moved up with no safety net. That's how serious I was. If I don't rip the Band-Aid off, whether I have a job or not, I'm never going to leave. So I quit my job and we moved, and I just crossed my fingers and hoped that by the time the money ran out, I'd have a job. And literally 1 week before the money ran out, Ketchum came calling. So I will always appreciate them for that. And also for the career that I was able to reignite in the agency world that Ketchum offered. And my switch of jobs had nothing to do with the fact that I was looking to leave. It was just a bigger challenge. It wasn't because I hated it. It wasn't because I didn't like the people. It wasn't because I didn't like the work I was doing or my clients. That was all great. I just saw this as a different challenge that was worthy of the next chapter of my career, which is why I switched jobs. And then the Dallas thing, they thought was a reason I might not want to consider it, but I jumped at it when they said, you have to be in Dallas.
Wow. Right. And it must have been, that's no small thing, because you also had to unravel a partnership.
Another uprooting. Yeah. Yeah. I'm all about uprooting things.
Yeah. But here we were all thinking you were a made guy after the partnership came through, and that was that. But I mean, there you go. That tells you there are degrees of happiness and there are degrees of what's going on behind the scenes and what's going on in the front facing world.
Now, I have to say the fishing in Northern California, at least my kind of fishing, bass fishing, is better. And that's the only thing I miss about California. But there's much more of a fishing culture here. Everyone you meet fishes. No one I met in San Francisco wanted to talk about fishing with me. But here I can just go down to the supermarket and have 5 conversations about bass fishing. And I love that. I revel in that.
Well, that's awesome. I'm all for finding yourself in a place that you associate with and that feels like home. Well, you're listening, everybody, to Real Estate Chat with Doug and Jim. This is the Dad 2.0 podcast, the audio companion to the summit where marketers, media, parents, and experts come together to discuss and define modern fatherhood. This week, we have a dad and a PR representative on the line and a great writer. He's a triple threat and a fisherman. There's so many threats. I don't know. Beyond triple, I don't know. Quadruple. What comes after that?
Quintuple, sextuple, septuple.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. He's a sextuple threat.
Until you're just a threat.
Yeah, he's just a threat. He's a threat to everybody he meets in the best possible way.
And don't forget his enthusiasm for mixed martial arts.
Yeah, we're gonna get through a lot of things in this next hour.
Can't
but
wait.
Everybody knows it's not my job to tell everybody who we're talking to. That's yours. So please do the honors.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for a great chat with someone who is near and dear to my heart just because he was a speaker at the first ever Dad 2.0 Summit back in 2012. And I've been thinking a lot about our history. We just turned 10 a couple of weeks ago. So to celebrate a 10th birthday, you really love the chance to talk to people who've been with you since the very, very beginning. And this man is definitely one of those. We met him when he was just a dad blogger, you know, between jobs and and writing Busy Dad, which was one of the flagship dad blogs of the before times. And then he went legit and he got a bunch of PR jobs with VP in them. We're going to talk later about what the difference is between a senior VP and an executive VP. He's currently an executive VP and executive director at Golan in Dallas, Texas. Please welcome our dear leader, Jim Lynn.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be here. And I can't believe it's been 10 years. Congratulations. Just being a voice for fatherhood and dads for a decade, that's pretty amazing. And I'm glad I was part of the first one. I forgot that I was at the first one.
Well, I figured it was my job to remind you of that. Back when we were trying to poach people off of South by Southwest in a rainstorm in Bastrop, Texas.
In a dry county, right?
Yes, it was a wet county and a dry county.
Soaking wet, dry county.
Right.
The worst kind.
So if you were to describe what the current gig is as executive VP at Golan, what was specific to this job that attracted the big move?
That's a great question. And the answer is, as EVP, yes, I'm working with clients, but I'm looking a lot more internally at how do we build the digital practice at Golan? You know, what specialties, what things should we focus on? How do we staff up? One of the big reasons that attracted me to Golan was the fact that the Dallas office actually has 80 or so people, and you can consider them pretty much all digital, in contrast to, you know, my previous agency where the population of folks considered digital was a lot smaller. I wasn't actually working with too many digital folks day in, day out. I was kind of my own island and I enjoyed it. At the time was just what I needed. I needed to be able to kind of spread my wings my way and represent digital and everything that's digital in marketing and PR for my office, for my region, and be that digital person. Oh, Jim, our digital guy. Love that. Help me build up skills, help me validate some skills that I had. I was like, do I really know how to do this? And I guess I did. But the task at hand or the challenge at Golan was now I'm responsible for building up digital as a department, as part of the DNA of Golan. As I see the comms industry and PR industry going, it's not you have a PR department and a digital department. Those are one and the same. So PR is evolving into something that's much more digital centric. And I saw this as a great opportunity to play a part in that evolution for Golan specifically, but outside of Golan, just for the PR comms industry.
Right. And since digital is evolving too, because you talk a lot about how broadcasting is giving way more to nanocasting, because that seems to have a much bigger effect. Ultimately, you're looking for making an impact locally because that actually moves the needle as far as conversion rates and so forth, in ways that people are still figuring out. And I think that speaks to how well you've advanced in the industry since you got the gig in San Francisco, that people are listening to you. And there is a lot of garbage traffic out there. And I think it's really important to try and pan for gold and all that and find something that yields actual value.
So
Mhm.
what do you mean by local, like nano casting or local? Like, is that literally local? Like you're
Yeah. So one thing I started doing toward the end of my time at Ketchum was this thing I called hyperlocal influentials. Notice I'm not saying influencer,
Mhm.
hyperlocal influentials. And that came about from a client who requested an influencer program, but they only wanted to hit 5 specific cities.
Okay.
And, looking at the way influencers work online, because the internet is an open system, you can't just have followers in Philly, right? If you're online and you have something to say, unless your content is about Philly,
Right.
which very few are, your followership's going to be from everywhere.
Right.
No matter how big or small you are, if you're a fishing influencer, you're going to have anglers from all over the country, if not the world, following you. It's not just I live in Dallas, I'm going to have Dallas fishermen following me. And so that was the big problem. Client wanted localized content for a localized audience, but wanted to use influencers. And I was like, well, that's kind of impossible, but here's what I can do. And what
That's
I
what clients
did,
love to hear, by the way. That's kind of impossible.
yeah. But notice I said kind of. I didn't say that's
Right.
impossible. It's kind of impossible. I need to put my brain on this and figure something out. And what I started doing was saying, well, how am I influenced on a local level through social media? Well, it's my friends and family, right? My neighbors, coworkers, anyone I interact with in real life. And they're online too. And so I thought there's got to be tons of people out there who have a pretty big following, but aren't quote unquote influencers. They may just be a really funny guy who has lots of friends locally. So I was like, next step, how do I find these people that aren't quote unquote influencers? So they're not trying to gain a worldwide audience. They just happen to have a lot of friends and family following them. And then I thought, how am I going to find them? So I basically went to Instagram and I said, I'm going to look up people who have tagged. I think one of the places I literally looked was Philadelphia Zoo. I had to find parents who lived in these cities who had a bigger proportion of local followers than not.
Hmm.
And I was like, I'm just going to find regular people with friends and family and find them through Instagram stalking. So I looked at people who tagged Philadelphia Zoo. And the concept there was, let's see, you often go to the zoo with kids.
Mhm.
And I can look at people tagging it and I can look at their followership and their engagement. And anyone I'd say who was under about 1,200 probably wasn't an influencer. They're probably just a really popular person in their friends and family circle. And I kind of vet each person I found with over 900 or 1,200 and just see what kind of content they were. But problem I've had with Philadelphia Zoo was tourists go to Philadelphia Zoo,
Yeah.
right? So I was finding people who were from all parts of the country. And so that's not Philly. What do I look at? What do I stalk to make sure that they're a parent, B, not a tourist? And then it just hit me, Chuck E. Cheese. You will never go to Chuck E. Cheese if you're a tourist. And you would never set foot in Chuck E. Cheese if you were not a parent. So I looked up the Chuck E. Cheese location tags, and that was the magic thing. I found tons of parents who had lots of friends and family who were definitely from those cities, because why the hell else would they be at Chuck E. Cheese? And it worked magically.
It's like the inverse of Olive Garden in Times Square. The only people there are tourists.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's the inverse theorem. But that worked out really well. That client actually saw increased sales, and that was great because it was a singular thing they did differently from everything else. So you could isolate the effect. I saw increased sales in those cities that we did the program for. The only kind of drawback of that is it's very labor intensive, and when you're in an agency, you charge for hours. So the
And
reach
you only got paid in skee ball tickets, and
that's kind of a hassle too.
That was difficult.
And you have to actually go to Chuck E. Cheese to redeem it.
Yeah.
But I hope we never represent Chuck E. Cheese.
Well, you never will
We'll
now.
just delete this. When you're at an agency, your clients pay for two things. They pay for the out-of-pocket expense, which is the money you've got to pass through. You're paying the influencers, you're paying whatever services, you're paying the ad platforms, and you've got your labor costs. And this is labor intensive. There's no database to help me find these people. It's all people just using kind of their smarts to say, how would I find a parent? We tried looking at tags of elementary schools and things. I felt kind of stalkery and doing that. And I was like, maybe we should look at elementary schools. But
yeah, now you're on an FBI. You're on an FBI
yeah,
watch
now
list.
on an FBI watch list too. You just pick up these things and these little ways of doing things, but it only comes from really truly understanding the internet and social and how that works and what the human dynamics within these platforms are and what happens in them. And one of the things that's a big challenge when you reach the higher levels of the agency world is that you can't do as much hands-on stuff as you used to. And I feel to be sharp at my job, I have to do hands-on stuff, right? Stuff changes every day. And unless I know, oh, what happens when you post this and you do this to the caption, like clients will ask you those questions. Unless you don't know it, I mean, unless you're doing it day in, day out, it's really hard to understand the little nuances and things like that. So the biggest challenge I'd say in digital in kind of rising up the ranks is still maintaining that sharpness from actually doing these things. So if I were to say that's one of the big challenges these days, that would be it.
So if I'm a dad influencer on the other side of that transaction, how do I make your job easier? How do I shape my content? How do I shape my strategy? Because if that is the future, if the idea of having localized influence is something I want to cultivate in my brand, the first thing is to maintain a relationship with you so you know whom to contact when you need them.
Yeah.
But also just the whole idea of making sure you know that I'm a resource when you need me for a particular campaign.
I wish I had an easy answer. That's a really tough thing to do. And
Sounds like a lot of Foursquare check-ins at Chuck E. Cheese.
Foursquare, wow.
Is the easiest way to get on Jim's radar. Or
my radar.
Or guys who spend a lot of time around elementary schools, which is a whole different.
I gotta write these notes down in my CompuServe account.
Lose either way you look at it. No, but the reality is, having done tons of influencer programs now, looking at all sorts of interests, passions, psychographics, what have you, there are so many people out there, so many people. And often you're relying on databases, like influencer databases. There are tons of them out there. And I have to say, that's the first place that people look. If you don't inherently know who the influencers are in a certain interest segment, you're going to go to a database, like a Tagger, a Creator IQ, whatever. Because not many people are looking for hyperlocal influentials like I was. That's not a thing yet. And I hope I can still keep it as a secret weapon in my back pocket. But most companies or brands are still looking for that reach and that engagement. And so the downside of hyperlocals is that their reach isn't high. So you've got to work with like 30 to 50 at a time. But think of the hours that are spent. It's expensive. It's not cheap. The influencers themselves are cheap because they're small, but the project is very expensive. So most still go to those databases. So I would say go to those databases. Don't rely on being popular in a community and someone doing the legwork to really dig into that community to see who's kind of rising to the top. Get yourself on those databases, get strong numbers, get good engagement. What I'm happy to see in the influencer world happening now more and more is the kind of emphasis on engagement, right? More so than reach. I think people have understood now that you can broadcast to 1 million people, but if they don't care about what they say, based on the fact that they're not engaging back with the content, you're going to get exposure, but are you going to change minds? Are you going to change opinions, instill beliefs? Not really, because no one really cares. They're passively watching your content. And if you just want a bunch of passive views, then just do advertising. If you want to actually influence and affect what people think or feel or believe about a product, a brand, what have you, those people in the audience have to care. And the indication for people caring is engagement. And I often, when I'm vetting, look for comments. I'm looking at the nature of the comments. I don't just want a heart emoji. I want people to actually say, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. Or, wow, I got to check this out. That shows that people care and that you've actually moved their minds somehow with your content to think a different way about, what you're talking about. And so that goes hand in hand with compelling content. There's nothing I hate more than a Instagram lifestyle influencer just posing with a product and having their kids all smiling.
The world needs more duck lips.
I can't stand that. What I love is creativity, doing something that gets people moved or laughing or stopping in their tracks.
And you led by example many times. We've seen lots of cool stuff from you. One of the great things about your job was you also came at this as a creative who did weird stuff, who I think injected Cucumon into his bloodstream at some point. Now, you mentioned that hyperlocal isn't a thing yet, but if we're going on the premise that it could be, because you've shown it actually has some pretty impressive conversion rates and so forth, and you could say, I want 30 guys in Chicago and they all know each other, and they
Yeah.
could get this discussion going, or you could have an
Yeah.
event like James
Yeah.
Lopez always does in New York. To what extent could that be a merging of the future?
I think it could. And the world kind of loops back. QR codes are back, and
Yeah.
SEO, I think, is back because for things like hyperlocal, there's no database, like I said, but every professional who has to find dads in Raleigh or whatever will now go to Google and look for local organizations, events, etc., that have to do with dads in Raleigh or Miami or Boston, wherever. And in this case, I think SEO matters a lot. Just get in front of the people searching for that stuff, because that's where they're all going to start. When we did this hyperlocal thing, one of the things I did also was just Google what's in these cities that, because another part of that program was to partner with local organizations to hold events. And so again, Google local events for kids. Get in all those searches, because nobody's an expert on a city they've never lived in. So how are they going to do it? They're going to go to Google, they're going to Instagram, they're going to look up hashtags. On your events, just use topical hashtags of the city. Philadelphia kids, whatever. Like, do things like that just so people can find you more easily. Because realistically, trying to kind of rise above the tide in a social media way so some PR professional finds you is almost impossible. There's just too many people vying for a top spot on social media. And honestly, fatherhood content does not drive the internet, right? We'd love it if it did, but it doesn't. And so it's going to be drowned out by TikTokers.
There's also, we've kind of established that you need a second vertical. You need to be a father who, say, fishes and drinks bourbon.
Yeah, right.
Or a father who runs a literary magazine.
Woohoo! I was going to ask Jim that, actually, is like, how is it helpful to be sort of a Renaissance influencer where you show off all different sides of your personality, not only to show that you can do multiple things, but that you might be attracting audience across different interests?
That's a great question, because I have a great answer. And the answer is yes, it helps, because often when brands are trying to target certain interests, they want to keep that mix as diverse as possible as well. Let's say Dungeons and Dragons. Let's say we want to find someone, a bunch of people that are interested in Dungeons and Dragons or influential in that. You're going to find your Gen Zers, your millennials, but every once in a while they'll be like, we don't want to leave the parents out. So maybe find someone interested in D&D who's a parent. And so if you can establish yourself as a D&D or fishing or what have you in your passion, but you also happen to be a dad, that helps a lot, because they want to vary the people within that interest as much as possible as well. And it might even be more helpful than someone who's just out there as a dad, because honestly, I've seldomly heard we want to hit dads, but I've heard we want people of this interest who also happen to be a dad. Can we get a dad in there as well? Right? So that dad plus is a very important thing and a way to stand out.
I have a two-parter coming up now, and it's about your education, because you were a psych major, which I am fascinated by. I've had many conversations with my 19-year-old son about this, about the kind of thing he might want to study. And I often think that if I had my college career to do over again, I would be a psych major, because I've become subsequently fascinated by it. So I guess the first thought is, did you envision a career like this when you were a psych major? But irrespective of that, to what extent do you think your psych degree benefits you in this line of work?
Okay, so I became a psych major because I wanted to be in this line of work.
There you go. Okay.
Right?
I figure it was a 50-50 shot.
Yeah, there wasn't a marketing or advertising major where I went to school. Liberal arts, nothing practical. And so I just, the way I picked my major was I flipped through the course book. Literally, I sat down one night, flipped through the course book, and I folded every page with a course that might be relevant to a career in marketing. And I looked at where the folds were. Laid. I looked at where the folds were, and psychology was one, sociology was two. So that's how I picked my major. I'm going to major in psych and take sociology classes. That's why I did my major. I wanted to be a marketer since I was in high school. I was known in my high school as the guy who drew the most outlandish posters for events. I loved advertising school events. I remember one of my favorites was I was on the cycling team. So prior to our races, to get people to go, I'd draw big posters And the funny thing is this would never fly in today's world. But I drew a bunch of cyclists with like razor wheels just slicing the opponents in half, blood on the road, gore. It's like, come to our race. We're going to destroy the competition.
That audience was extremely disappointed. Like, nobody's this is just normal bites.
We're the gladiators we were promised. So ever since high school, I love the idea of using content to move people, content to convince people, persuade people.
I love the idea of lying to people to get them to come to events.
What sort of things do you learn about as a psych major that benefit that?
You just learn how the human mind is wired, right? What people tend to do, how groups affect your decision-making abilities. That experiment that's really famous that I just can't see myself ever falling for, but the numbers say that people did this was, you get a bunch of people in a room and one person, doesn't know what's going on and the rest of them do. And you hand that person a color swatch and he'll say it's green. But if everyone else says it's red, when it comes to his turn, like, oh yeah, it's red. Like, I would never fall for that. If this is green, it's green. But people do. And the power of influence is just inherent in that. It's like, people are influenced by those around them, what they see, what they hear other people say. And I thought that was so powerful and interesting. This doesn't sound good, but it's true. The fact that the mind can be so easily manipulated just fascinated me.
Well, yeah, we've seen a lot of that lately, haven't we?
Yeah, I guess so. But it just fascinates me. Like group behavior, the way people interpret things, what you can do, little things that you can tweak to make people just think differently, do differently. It's just something that's interested me. It just helped me understand the mind. And I think it was this exercise of me looking into what human beings do, how they behave, and why they behave. It just got me more and more curious and observant about human behavior rather than anything concrete I learned in a textbook.
One of my favorite case studies I read was something along the lines of a theater wants to move popcorn. And so the initial strategy is to have a small and a large. And the small is like 6 and the large is 12.
Oh, the medium thing, right?
Yeah. And so what you do is you have that medium at 10.50 and everybody will be like, oh, well, I guess if the large is only another $1.50, I'll just take a large.
Yeah.
It's
Things
just
like
the madness
that.
of crowds. Yeah.
When you read it, you're like, no, I wouldn't do that. But in life, you do that every single day unconsciously. And that's why I love PR. That's why I love marketing and comms. You can just see the impact of small actions. And that's cool.
It's still one of my favorite all-time episodes of this here podcast, the James Lopez episode, where he takes local influence and brings it into the real world, where he works with brands but like does real stuff with real people in the flash. And I wanted to know, Jim, like as you look at hyperlocal or different ways to bring about and measure real influence, have you ever tried to do, or could you see a future where people are brought together in real life through something that's not just hashtags on a screen, but it's like real life influence?
Well, I mean, that's been going on forever in the PR world. And up until last year, events were part of everything we've ever done, inviting influencers to events and things like that, because one of the effects of that is, the more your influencers know one another, the more they're going to amplify each other, right?
And have conversations. And I've been on a lot of influencer events, but I mean like hiring an influencer to have an event with people, like consumers, real people.
Mm-hmm.
So not just bringing influencers together.
Oh, having them kind of lead these things?
Yeah, not just to amplify an event online, but like actually taking an influencer who has real influence, whether it's in, let's just say it's in the dad, like James Lopez in the dad community in New York. He will work with a brand and get stuff, get money, and have actual events and spread dadfluence in the flash.
Yep. One of my favorite influencer programs I worked on in my previous agency, I don't want to say the brand or anything, but it was an alcohol brand. And this was really interesting.
I think I know the brand you're talking about. So
okay, well, we knew there were certain areas in the United States that are very hip. And when something's popular there, it soon spreads throughout pop culture. So what we did was we actually hit the streets and looked for the coolest people in the coolest neighborhoods of the coolest cities.
The Billy Eichner approach.
Regardless of their online influence. Like that didn't matter. We wanted their offline influence.
Yeah.
Record store owners, bookstore owners, bar owners. And this brand basically gave them stipends to throw parties.
Yeah.
Throw parties with our product anywhere you want it. You're the cool guy and you're going to do stuff. And because you're doing it and you're inviting all your friends, this will become cool. And it was really cool to see the effect that had on actual sales. They did surveys of opinions of the brand, went up. And that's, I think, an example of what you're saying. Work with someone influential to do things with their friends and family to help promote the brand. And one of my favorite influencer programs, because for once, your presence on the internet didn't matter.
Yeah. So Doug knows I'm really big on the idea of social infrastructure, of like the online community being exposed as a bit of a fraud through all this. Like, we need each other. We need to be with each other in real life.
Yeah.
And trying to think that through from an influencer standpoint, you see an influencer campaign and there's all this stuff on social, and that's fine. And that can move the needle, and it obviously does. But like what you're talking about, like getting people together and physically touching the product, tasting it, whatever you're doing with it, a multi-sensory experience with a brand feels like it could strengthen and have a more meaningful relationship with that brand than just seeing something cross your screen a couple times in a 2-week period or whatever it is.
Yeah, and it sounds like post-COVID, that's going to be even higher priority, wouldn't you think?
That's what I'm wondering. Is there a way to like really hit the ground running when we come out of this? Because people are aching to do stuff. Is there a way from a PR standpoint to leverage that pent-up demand to get products and get brands in front of people by having people come together safely, actually touch, taste, and feel? I'm describing a sex dungeon, but let's just put that aside.
Which is interesting, because I was saying
they're also one of Jim's clients, which is weird.
They're eager to do this as soon as they find their pants that have waistbands.
Like, just think of the way people will just flood to conferences. Like, we're so sick of virtual conferences these days, right?
I just want to sit in a meeting again. My God.
Yes.
And just
wait for the elevator.
to events. And even in the PR world, it's been so tough taking out of any ideation session the ability to brainstorm around an event or activation in the real world. Like, that just took a huge piece of everything we do right out of the equation. And great for digital, because all that attention went to things we could do with influencers or digital. But just think of when the world reopens, how many brands are going to do really, really cool events, because everyone will do events. So now you've upped the game on making your event interesting and cool and the must attend. Think of conferences, how crazy they'll be. I can't wait for that. It's going to be crazy. And Dad 2.0 live will be like the second coming of Dad 2.0. It'll be amazing.
So, and what advice do you have on that, just in terms of how we might shape the new events to appeal to people who are coming out of COVID, and what they'll be most eager to take part in, and what brands will be most eager to back?
I think, honestly, just the fact that people can interact in person again will be enough. I think brands that's it.
No programming, just show up here in a big auditorium.
we rented this hotel, just Monday to Wednesday. Come on by, here's a registration fee.
Just $100 just to hug each other. That's all we're doing.
Hug each other, cheers, whatever. Like, honestly, it's brands that have always relied on having the product in front of you, wearing the product, using the product, a product that can be used by groups of people, cars, camping equipment, I don't know. But just anything that just has to do with facilitating your ability to just enjoy the people in front of you and do something together will just, like, people are just missing that. I think electronics won't figure as large into the new world as, something tangible and analog. A bike. Think of that.
I'm thinking we're going to have just 2 concentric circles in the middle of a large room, and the outer ring will rotate clockwise and the inner will rotate counterclockwise, and we'll just hug each other.
With a tap in the middle?
Exactly. You mentioned high school, and I wanted to call attention to the blog post you wrote for Golan. I love the fact that one of your favorite baseball players growing up was Fred Lynn, just because his name sounded like yours. Also because I'm a Red Sox fan, and I also love Freddie Lynn and Jim Rice and Yaz, but I love the fact that you have that specific reason for identifying with Freddie Lynn. So you mentioned you were like the only Chinese kid in your class.
Yeah, at my school, aside from my sister.
Right. Yeah. We haven't talked about that at all. And it seems something that's on your mind a lot now, especially, I'm sure you have discussions with Fury and Furietta about what their lives are like. I can see how you kind of developed into an entertainer and a marketer in a way to kind of stand out and kind of be known for that as opposed to what you look like. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think my years between 4th and 6th grade where I experienced that, because I went to private school in 7th grade. And I'll tell you, I studied so hard to get into that private school to escape what I'd experienced.
Yeah.
Those years formed almost everything that I am today, from getting into fighting and martial arts because I felt I was too passive and I should have stood up for myself. And I promised after those years, I would never back down from a fight again, which is why the second I could, I started doing every martial art out there, MMA, Muay Thai, just so I would never back down from another fight ever again in my life. If it wasn't for those 2 years, I might have been a knitter. I don't know. Like, and like those, like
bourbon and wool.
Right. Bourbon and wool. But it impacted so many things. It killed my self-confidence. But in doing so, I found fishing. I fished because I had no friends. And that was something I could do by myself. I taught myself to fish. Every time my mom went to the drugstore, the supermarket, I'd be in the magazine aisle picking out every fishing magazine I could find to teach myself how to fish, because YouTube didn't exist back then. I had to read about it. And I ended up loving fishing because it was something I could do that didn't require lots of friends. I have some great friends from back in the day who did fish with me, and I always will appreciate them for that. But for the most part, it was a solitary activity I could do to kind of get away from it all. Man, I'd be so scared on the shoreline, though, when roving packs of kids would come and throw rocks at me and call me Ching Chong while I was fishing. So that got me to save up to buy a little boat that could fit in my mom's station wagon so I could be out in the middle of the pond where their rocks wouldn't hit me. So I'd just row out far enough so their rocks would just kind of plop a couple of feet from me and keep fishing. So all these things like motivated everything I did, but everything I love today, everything I am today happened because of that. And that was me born through hardship. That just made me look at the world differently. I wouldn't say I'd do it all over again if I had the choice, but I don't regret where it took me.
Well, you made some lemonade, clearly.
I sure did.
Which is the kind of resilience you do want to teach your kids. And having watched your son and daughter grow up, I've never met either of them, but to look at Fury now, good grief. When will his modeling career begin? How do you think that experience and the experience since of how you overcame that informs your conversations with them about their place in the world? Speaking of generational improvement, how do you feel the relationship between you and your parents is different from how you've tried to raise Fury and Furietta?
Yeah, Furietta. I'm going to use that as her nickname from now on. My parents grew up in a completely different world, literally different world than I did. So there was nothing that they could have really done to prepare me because they had no idea what they were getting into. They came to the States a year before I was born. And so they were navigating this culture as I was. And I'll say that I think my kids were born into a very different culture than I grew up in, partly due to the time period and really due to the fact that we lived in an area, or they were born in an area that was already very diverse, LA, right? I actually took my son out of public school in first grade because it was all like 20 out of 22 kids were Asian. And I took him out of that to protect him from the future world. I'm like, I don't want him to think this is reality. When he moves anywhere but here, he's going to be hit with a hard dose of reality. I need him to go to a school that's a lot more diverse. If I experienced this in fourth grade and it was tough, I don't want him to get used to this as the default, to go out into the real world and realize, oh no, this is not what I'm used to. So it affected a lot of decisions in where I chose to live, what I exposed him to, things like that. I won't say that it was a conscious effort to steer him from the world that I grew up in, but it was kind of a hybrid of recognizing what this world is now and just trying to really protect him from most of the bad things that I experienced growing up, but recognizing that it was night and day. My environment, his environment, the time period I grew up in, the time period he grew up in. So we had surprisingly few talks about that. And it did kind of make me curious when he first got into Harley culture, what his experience would be like. We're in Texas. He's joining the Harley owners group. And, you know, my bias is kicked in like, oh no, you're going to have a rude awakening trying to join a Harley riders group in Texas. Good luck. But he goes into everything with full confidence because he's experienced nothing but success in his life. Like everything he touches, he's done well. So he went in there with full confidence. And I started thinking, it's not what you walk into, it's how you walk into it that makes all the difference. He walked in feeling like, hey, I belong here. I ride a Harley. I'm down to do whatever this group is going to do on the ride, participate in the monthly meetings. And he went into it full of confidence. And they saw that. He's the youngest guy in that group by far. Most guys are older than I am in that group. But they took him in. They treat him so well. He's like their little buddy. And I went to a few of their meetings. I loved it so much. And the people were so nice and welcoming that I joined. So now I'm part of the group. But again, my bias kept me from wholeheartedly encouraging that. And I would ask him a few times, how was it? Did they care that you were Asian? And he's like, nobody cares you're Asian. You ride a Harley. That's what you're united by, the fact that you love Harley. And that's all that matters there. I was like, that is so interesting. And I'm so glad I was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when is the pilgrimage to Milwaukee?
One of these days. I'm going to do it. But now I got work. So he'll do it and just take Instagrams.
I've been to the Harley Davidson Museum in Milwaukee.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, it's very nice. I'm not a Harley guy, but it was a really, really cool place.
I
Sure,
kind
it's
of
got a
want to
rich
be
heritage,
now.
yeah.
I have the disease. I mentioned I watched Long Way Up. Have you
Oh
seen
yeah,
those?
I haven't seen it, but I know it's Ewan McGregor and someone touring South America with the new electric Harley.
Well, there's 3 of them. Yeah, they began with Long Way Round, and that was London to New York, the long way. And then the second one was Long Way Down, and that was from London to the tip of Africa. That was incredible, the whole African trip. And then the third one is, they actually went down to Ushuaia, which is at the very tip of Chile, and then worked their way all the way up to LA. They made it look like a shitload of fun. So now, how long have you been riding now? How do you get started as a Harley rider? What did you do?
I've always wanted to own a motorcycle and ride a motorcycle. That's always been on my bucket list. But it's always been one of those things like, man, everyone I know who's ever ridden has gotten into some sort of crash.
Oh,
it's not if, it's when, right?
Charlie Borman, who is Ewan's friend, he has shattered his leg like 5 times.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So knowing that and trying to be a responsible parent, I had to kind of put that bucket list item at the bottom of the list. Although I guess that I would really love it, and I always have loved kind of motorcycle culture, I was like, I got to be more responsible. Maybe when my kids are grown and financially independent, I can take that risk. But Marcus got into it on his own when we moved here. There was his pandemic hobby that he started. He bought a Harley from that dealership that he works at now. And I went with him, and the guys in that dealership were so friendly and welcoming. And Shannon was actually the one that pushed me to get it. I was like,
wow, there are a lot of envious men out there.
Yeah, I know.
Who are not familiar with the experience of their significant other encouraging them to get a motorcycle.
No, it's funny. Whenever Fury loses a sale, I'm like, oh, you lost a sale. It's like, yeah, the wife. But in my case, it was the opposite. I was kind of like, do I want to spend the money? Do I want to take a risk? I still have kids to raise, college to put them through. And she put it to me this way. She's like, he's taking a year off. Who knows? Next year he'll be in college. If you ever wanted to ride with him, this is the year to do it. If you want to have that bonding time where you and your son are riding motorcycles like you've always wanted to do all your life, you have to do it now.
Smart.
And I was like, done. So I got my Harley, and I've been riding it ever since. And I ride with him. I ride with the Harley Owners Group. Just went out last night. It was a lot of fun. I just love it. There's a social circle now that I have in Dallas, which is not one you'd expect. An Asian guy from California to have. But there you go.
Yeah, I guess, moving to a state like Texas and taking up motorcycling, it's a nice merging of, you got a lot of land to cover and you got a cool thing to cover it in. So.
Yeah, right. Yep, it does get hot. That's the only complaint I have. It gets hot.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you got to wear all those leathers, right?
Yeah. You do, actually.
No, it's a safety thing. Yeah. So when you skid, denim will just rip right off you, but you got to wear leathers so you can maintain that frictionless slide into oblivion.
At least on the jacket. Yeah. I've got jeans that have the Kevlar, so I don't have to wear like chaps. I mean, especially at my level, I haven't mastered it yet, and I don't want to get hurt, so I'm padded up as much as possible.
Have you taken a fall lately?
No, I haven't taken a fall yet. Came really close once, and actually the bike for some reason sped out of control when I was turning and went so fast across the street that I literally was hanging onto the handles while my feet were in the air.
Oh,
and then I jumped the island and I turned the bike to get on the road, but the cars were coming at me. So I jumped the island again and eventually came to a stop on the island, unscathed, didn't drop the bike. But that was my only scare, but that was early on. And I've since learned to control the bike a lot better for my own sake.
Wow.
What's a good starter model for a newbie?
You
to
hear
learn?
this all the time, and all the salesmen tell you this, but I think it's true. A lot of people say start with the smaller bike, right? It's a lot easier to handle. But the Harley dealership guy who sold me my bike before Fury worked there, he said, sit on a bunch and sit on the one that feels right to you. Because every Harley has a different handlebar height, seat depth, height overall, weight. And so I sat on a bunch of them until one was like perfect. So like Goldilocks, I guess, call it Goldilocks way. Right? I sat on one that was too small. I sat on one that was just too big. And I sat on one that was just right. And I bought that one. And although that's not a quote light bike, it's a Softail. It's kind of middle. If you look at the size of Harleys, it's probably middle of the road. Although it's not a small bike, because it's so comfortable to ride and I just feel right in it. I think that contributes a lot to my ability to kind of ride and pick up skills. So I don't think it's the size of the bike, it's the fit of the bike to your preference.
Yeah, well, buying a small bike didn't seem on brand for you anyway.
Right. I need big, loud bikes.
And what's cool is rather than a Fury be Jim's son, you're Fury's dad.
I am Fury's dad. Yes. He goes by Marcus now. He outgrew his name, but to me, he's always Fury. They're like, you're Marcus's dad?
Yeah, I guess he'll always be to me too. But yeah.
Right, yeah. So in the group, I am Marcus's dad. And that is hilarious.
That's awesome. That's one of the things I've always been looking forward to in parenting is when it stops being, oh, you're Jeff's kid, to you're Julie's and Mallory's dad.
Yeah, I'm solidly Marcus's dad, and I always will be in that group because, he found them first. He's the guy that really got into that first and talked about me and convinced me to do it, brought me in as the newbie. And Marcus's dad joined the hog.
It's really smart of Shannon too. I mean, to make you realize time is short. There's always other stuff you could do later.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's things that can only be done right now. And like I left my corporate job 13 years ago this summer when my oldest was 4 because I realized I'm like, I have 1 year left before she starts full day kindergarten. And that's at least 13 years of school. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, if I want to experience what it's like to be her dad full time, like at home, this is my year. This is the last chance.
Now or never.
Before she's 18. And so I did it. And when they were 4 and 1, and I mean, I've never gone back, but that I can always work later. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be 4 and 1 ever again. So that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah. I'm glad she talked me into it. It wasn't too hard. She just had to say those words, but she did talk me into it. Otherwise, I'd have walked out. I would have rationalized my way out of it like I do so many things.
Yeah, but she had you at hello.
I almost here's to just jumping in and pulling up roots. I mean, I guess we go back to what we started talking about, just doing the thing and moving forward.
It's funny, the cycle of life. You're irresponsible and then you try to live responsibly. And now I'm in the stage of my life where I got to live a little more irresponsibly.
Yeah.
Well, we're all at that stage where it's like, hey, you know what? Fuck it.
Yeah. I got
Welcome to the fuck it generation. Population us.
Yep.
Well, that's funny. That's interesting you say that, Doug. I'm wondering if that's going to be one of the, like, what age group, maybe it's our age group. Well, I mean, you're in a different one than Jim and I, but let's just put us all together. Let's just put us all in the age group for now. But like, is there going to be this sort of like, man, there are no goddamn guarantees. There never was, but most people objectively know that, but they rationalize their way out of living every day like it matters. But I'm wondering if all of this past 14 months and counting is going to put in people of a certain age, and maybe it's our kids' ages, the ability to just be like, I'm going all in whenever I got the chance.
Tomorrow's never a guarantee.
Forget saving everything for age 65. Like, who the hell knows if that's if I'm ever going to see that.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like that. It sounds like anybody, and then also our generation, anybody who was flirting with the midlife crisis of any type is going to get it jet propulsed.
Because I already had my midlife. Going to England every year, multiple times a year to drive around watching soccer. I'm pretty sure that is my midlife.
That was a fun time, wasn't it? Back when you could just up and go to England for a couple of weeks. And
those days will return. I'm looking at prices every day, trying to find my way back.
I wanted to ask too about your other child, about Leslie. How's the move treated her? She has a stepsister to partner with, which is great. because you were supposed to speak at a panel about blended families but years back.
Oh,
And I've
yeah.
always wanted to talk to you about what that experience has been like with you and Shan and the 5 kids.
It's funny because we went into this kind of bracing ourselves for that transition. And we often talk about this. There was surprisingly very little transition. And so I don't have a good story to tell because nothing happened.
That's the
blended
best
just fine.
story in and of itself.
They
Isn't
blended
it?
just fine. And when she moved in with me, it was 5 kids in the house. Her 2 sons, daughter, my son, my daughter. The 2 middle sons had to share a room for years. The 2 daughters had to share a room. And we were like, we are just walking into disaster here. But nothing. They all get along great. Leslie still flies from California to come visit. She's put in more air miles than I have this year.
Right.
She flies alone, unaccompanied, and she's just an experienced traveler at age 10.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's hanging out in the Platinum Club in the
Yeah, right. Unlimited drinks, whatever.
As many Shirley Temples as she wants.
Well, that's amazing that it's been so effortless in that way. I mean, is it possible that the 5 of them saw the 2 of you and were just kind of reassured by that?
I think that's part of it.
The 2 of you together have always been, from the outside, obviously, it's never what it seems, but from the outside, it seems remarkably seamless and loving. And so
that's it's reflected on the inside too. Like, it's just amazing that, you know, we actually like each other in addition to loving each other. Like, that's, I think, the secret to a good relationship. You have to actually like that person you love.
That's awesome. I'm here for that. I know what that's like, to have a chance to be with somebody that you love spending time with and love.
Right. Yeah, like I'm not the type of guy to like jump around and go, oh, I get to go to the bar with the boys. If I had a choice to go to the bar with someone, I'd choose Shannon to go to the bar with. She's fun to go to the bar with.
Well, that's the click, right? The best part when you click is you have just as much fun with the person the next morning as you do that night.
Right, and that should be your standard. That should be your standard in a relationship.
That's a really great way of putting that, Doug. I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, like having a great night, but then getting up and having breakfast and talking about the news, or
having a great morning, man. That's the way it goes. It's like, oh, we have to go out and do something. Oh,
yeah. No news is great news, I guess, in this way.
Yeah,
that's totally great. And in fact, speaking of news, I know Texas has been 100% open for a while. Is your office open now? Are you actually getting to meet the people that you've been working with for over a year?
Informally, we have meetups in small groups, and that's not frowned upon. It's not actively encouraged either. I think a lot of companies are that way, just kind of limbo for now until more people are vaccinated, but we're still working from home for the foreseeable future. What I think the biggest change this will all bring about is client meetings, right? No one's going to be flying from San Francisco to Dallas 2-3 times a month anymore. We've learned that we can do even the biggest of planning meetings online. Think of the money that clients can save. We don't have to fly their agency people back and forth for every big meeting. That's going to change a lot. And I don't think you'll doubt that I'm a people person. I need people around me. You know, every time someone in my office suggests some sort of meetup, my hand's first. I'm up, I'm going, I'm doing it.
Interesting contrast. It's like either among a lot of people or out on your boat doing nothing.
Yeah, right.
Definite.
I don't half-ass anything.
Yes. Very clear delineation between extrovert Jim Lynn and fuck off Jim Lynn.
And those two need to exist in harmony. I'm balancing the force. But I will spend as much time as possible in the office interacting with people because that's how I like to do. And that's what gives me energy. I love collaborating with people on ideas. I just want to meet the people I work with. I started this job in the middle of the pandemic, so I've never got a chance to meet people.
Yeah.
The week they went remote, I started. And I worked from California until the time was right to move. And we moved, but even though I was moved here, like we're still virtual. And, every chance I get to meet these people face to face, I do. And I'm glad we've had those opportunities because I'd go crazy working somewhere where I didn't ever meet anyone that I worked with. Some people can do it. I can't.
So now as an EVP, I think, and you say you can't really be as hands-on as you'd like. And I totally get that because you want to have a tactile experience with what it means to interact with PR professionals and influencers. And that makes your job easier because, you don't want to be insulated from that and you want to be on the ground. But at the same time, you have to think big picture. And I really am curious, having been with us for 10 years as part of Dad 2.0, and knowing that Dad 2.0 has a lot to do with the future of influencing and influence. and influenza. We've spent many discussions on this podcast talking about minimizing, editing our lives, choosing one or two platforms if you need them. But given the changing face of social media, the changing face of influence in general, where do you see this going?
For one, I see a much greater blending of brand content and influencer content. It used to be, the brand was one thing. They do the influencer content to reach that influencer's audience, and these two things existed separately. I see a much bigger merge of the two, in that more brands are really working with influencers, not just to reach a side audience, but to kind of develop their core content. Like whitelisting, for example, that didn't happen in the old days. But now, like, I got to work that into every contract I do, which is, can the brand sponsor your content and use paid amplification to get it out to their audience rather than rely on your organic audience? I see a lot of contracts where the brand is negotiating that they can use that influencer's content on their own brand channels. That really wouldn't have happened back in the day. And when this first started happening, I was really against it, because my view has always been the influencer is only as valuable as their audience. You take the audience out of that influencer's context and that message fell short. You read my blog back in the day, and you liked me because of these weird, absurd things I did. So when I did weird, absurd things with brands, people who read my blog loved it. But if you just took Jim Lynn out of context and put that content in front of a bunch of people who didn't know me, like, what's this fool doing? And the context of audience is so important. So when whitelisting and kind of getting rights to content first started happening, I was like, this is going to fail. But I think because that started happening, brands and influencers are starting to merge what they're creating as content. As technology advances, so the average person has access to tools for editing and actually creating great content, brands value that. And influencers almost become another production arm of the brand versus a third party, let's say, advocate. I don't like to use that word in a paid sense, but literally speaking. So rather than becoming an advocate for that brand, that influencer is now going to become a content arm for that brand. And I see more and more brands doing this because they're merging. And also the platforms are getting more and more organic looking. Great example of that is TikTok, right? To be a good TikTok brand, your stuff has to look like TikTok. You can't just throw an ad, a video ad that you put on Facebook and throw it on TikTok. No one's going to watch it. You've got to get silly on it. You've got to get kind of like jerky and organic and kind of hectic with that content to make it look like a piece of TikTok content. So if you're trying to appeal to the audience of TikTok and you have to create that kind of content, why not work with influencers who know that dynamic and create that kind of content for you? So that's going to merge. It's already happening. It's going to happen more. It's not going to be just influencers. Now there's technology and the willingness for brands to use user-generated content. Some fan makes a cool video about your product. You're going to put it on your social channels. You're going to pay that fan for the rights for that video. And you see this happening all the time. Fan-made videos, UGC, for many brands is sometimes better than the brand itself. Like, let the
most of the time,
let the consumer be creative and imaginative and give them some credit for it, whether it's in the form of paying them or kind of elevating them into that bigger sphere of brand fans through your channels. Like, do something to acknowledge your brands and co-create with your fans. That's definitely the way things are going now.
I just wanted to clear up. Jim said to co-create with your fans, not procreate with your fans. Just want to make sure everybody understands.
Or at least disclose that to HR. Yeah, by all means.
Yeah, that's a different campaign altogether.
Wow, if that's where we're headed.
That is the full integration of brand and influence.
I said live events are going to be a thing, so
Wow, another light bulb just went off for the next Dead 2.0.
Text onions already as well. So that seems like a great place to stop with Jim on his big loud bike. Jim Lynn, PR guy extraordinaire, executive vice president at Golan out of Dallas. Hilarious, influential dad blogger, OG dad blogger.
OG, baby.
We didn't even talk about cigars and bourbon that much, but he does bourbon and bass on Instagram. That's the handle, right?
Yeah, at bourbon and bass.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jim. This has been a pleasure catching up with you. It's been a long, long time.
I'm glad it was just like a conversation catching up with you guys. It really wasn't like, oh, I'm doing a podcast. That's the best part of it.
We actually haven't started recording yet. So now we're going to
God damn it. Can we do this over?
But yeah, this has been really fun. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Dad 2.0 podcast. Please do tune in next week for another awesome conversation with an awesome dad. In the meantime, as always, please take care of each other and yourselves. Wear your masks, get your shots, stay safe, and we'll be back with you in a week. Until then, bye-bye, everyone. Thanks, man.
All
That
right.
was fun.
Cool. Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for having me.